It started with a joke or maybe a confession disguised as one. You know, Emma said, swirling her coffee, if our husbands stay away any longer, people might start thinking we're having an affair. Clara laughed, but her heart stuttered. Would that really be so bad? She said, and instantly regretted it. The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. They were two married women, both professionals in their 30s, forced by circumstance to share a temporary apartment in downtown New York, while their husbands were away on a months-long overseas project. On paper, it sounded harmless, convenient even, but real life had other plans. Emma was the kind of woman who carried storms in her eyes. She was confident, sarcastic, a senior architect who didn't believe in fate, but always wore her wedding ring like armor. Clara, on the other hand, was softer, a graphic designer with a tender heart and an inconvenient habit of caring too much. At first, living together was just a practical arrangement. They shared groceries, traded late-night gossip, and laughed at the absurdity of their situation. But somewhere between the burned morning toast and the shared bottle of red wine on Friday nights, something began to shift. The laughter lingered longer. The silences grew heavier. And the space between them, once filled with polite distance, started to hum with something electric. One night, after a long day at work, they sat side by side on the couch, watching an old romantic comedy. The movie's heroine confessed her love in a rainstorm, and Clara sighed. Movies make it look so easy, she murmured. Love, I mean. Like it's supposed to be magic. Emma turned to her, eyes catching the flicker of the TV light. Maybe it is. Maybe it just happens when you're not paying attention. Their eyes held for too long. Clara felt her pulse drum against her throat, a wild, nervous rhythm that made her want to look away but couldn't. Then Emma smiled, slow, tired, and heartbreakingly sincere. You know, she said softly, I don't remember the last time someone really looked at me. Clara's chest tightened. Maybe you've been looking at the wrong people. The air cracked open between them. Neither spoke again for the rest of the movie. Days turned into weeks. The city outside buzzed with life, taxis honking, rain splattering on glass, strangers rushing by, but inside that apartment, time seemed to move differently. Emma started waking up early to make coffee for both of them. Clara began leaving little notes on the fridge. Don't forget your umbrella. You always do. They didn't talk about it, but something tender bloomed quietly in the spaces where words didn't belong. One evening, Emma came home looking exhausted. Her makeup was smudged, her voice sharp from arguing with a client. Clara didn't say anything, just handed her a mug of tea and turned on some soft jazz. Why are you always so damn kind? Emma muttered, collapsing onto the couch. Clara smiled faintly. Because someone has to be. For a long moment they just sat there, the music filling the silence. Emma's eyes softened, the armor she wore every day cracking just a little. You make it hard to keep pretending, she said quietly. Pretending what? That I don't look forward to coming home. The words hung in the air like a secret too beautiful to speak aloud. It was never supposed to happen. Not between them. But late one Friday night, after a bottle of wine and too many unsaid things, Emma reached out, her hand trembling, and brushed a loose strand of hair from Clara's face. Clara froze. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. Emma! Don't! Emma whispered. Just don't say anything right now. Her fingers lingered against Clara's cheek, tracing the warmth there. It wasn't just desire. It was something deeper, something terrifying. When their lips finally met, it wasn't passion that hit first. It was relief. The kind that comes after years of being misunderstood, of forcing yourself to love the right person while knowing something inside you was still waiting. The kiss was slow, trembling, and impossibly gentle. A confession in silence. When they finally pulled apart, Clara's eyes glistened. What are we doing? I don't know, Emma admitted. But it feels honest. In the days that followed, the apartment changed. Everything was the same, the furniture, the city view, the half-empty wine bottles, but it all felt different. They tried to go back to normal. They joked, they worked, they cooked dinner together like before. But the air between them was alive, now charged with stolen glances, accidental touches, and the unspoken knowledge that they had crossed a line they could never uncross. Clara avoided Emma for a few days, throwing herself into deadlines and phone calls with her husband, pretending everything was fine. But when she heard Emma crying in the shower one night, she broke. She stood outside the bathroom door, hand trembling. "Emma," she whispered. There was silence, then the soft sound of the door unlocking. Emma stood there, eyes red, water still dripping from her hair. "I can't do this, Clara," she said, her voice cracking. "I can't love you when I'm supposed to love someone else." Clara's heart shattered, but she stepped forward anyway, wrapping her arms around Emma. "Maybe you don't get to choose who saves you," she said quietly. They stayed like that, holding each other as if the world outside didn't exist, two women caught in the impossible middle between guilt and grace, between what was right and what felt real. For days after that night, silence filled the apartment like fog. Every word felt dangerous, every glance too revealing. Emma began spending more hours at the office, coming home late with excuses that didn't make sense even to herself. Clara stayed up waiting, pretending she wasn't. One night, Clara heard the lock turn at 1 a.m. She pretended to be asleep on the couch, but Emma paused in the doorway, watching her. The light from the hallway brushed against Clara's face, and something in Emma's chest cracked open again. She whispered softly, "I'm sorry," though she knew Clara couldn't hear her, or maybe she could, because the next morning, there was coffee already brewed on the counter, and a sticky note beside it that read, "Stop apologizing for wanting something real." Emma stared at the note for a long time before crumpling it, her heart hammering. By the third week, pretending became impossible. They sat in the kitchen one evening, both too tired to speak. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound between them. Then Clara broke the silence. "Emma," she said softly, "if you want me to move out, I will." Emma looked up, startled. "What? Why would you say that?" "Because we're breaking rules that we can't unbreak," Clara said, her voice trembling. "I can't be here and keep pretending that what happened didn't mean anything." Emma's throat tightened. "It did mean something." "Then why are you running from it?" Emma looked away, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "Because I don't know how to stop being who I'm supposed to be." Clara's eyes softened. "Maybe you don't have to stop. Maybe you just need to start being who you are." The words hung in the air, raw and terrifying. Emma exhaled shakily, as if every wall she'd built was beginning to crumble. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," Clara admitted. "But it's the truth." Emma stood, her chair scraping softly against the floor. She walked over, stopping just inches from Clara, and looked down at her with those storm-colored eyes. "Do you want me to say it?" Clara swallowed. "Say what?" "That I love you." The words came out like a confession, quiet but unshakable. Clara's eyes glistened. "Then say it like you mean it." Emma took a breath, and for the first time in her life she stopped running. "I love you," she said. "I don't know what it means yet, and I'm scared as hell, but I love you." Clara reached out, her hand trembling as she touched Emma's cheek. "That's all I needed to hear." They kissed again, slower this time, softer, but with a depth that burned through every rule they'd ever been taught. The following days felt like stolen sunlight. They cooked breakfast together, laughed over spilled coffee, brushed past each other in the hallway with that familiar electric pull. It wasn't perfect, it was fragile, messy, real. But love, Clara thought, was supposed to be messy. She had lived too long believing love only existed inside the lines: marriage, expectations, the version of herself that made everyone else comfortable. But here, in this tiny apartment, she found a version of love that made her feel alive. Yet even as their hearts tangled deeper, reality waited at the door. One Sunday morning, Emma's phone buzzed on the counter. Clara glanced at the screen, a text from Daniel. "Landing next Friday. Can't wait to see you. Miss you, Em." Her chest tightened. Friday. That was 5 days away. Emma came in, towel around her shoulders, hair still damp from the shower. She saw Clara's face and froze. "What's wrong?" Clara didn't answer. She just slid the phone toward her. Emma's heart dropped. "I wasn't snooping," Clara said quietly. "It just lit up." "I know." Emma sat down slowly, her shoulders heavy. "He's coming home." The silence was suffocating. Clara looked at her, tears burning behind her eyes. "What happens now?" Emma stared at her hands. "I don't know." "Yes, you do," Clara said, her voice breaking. "You'll go back to him. You'll pretend none of this happened. And I'll just be another mistake you can't admit to." Emma's head snapped up, anger flashing. Don't you dare call yourself a mistake. Then what am I? Clara demanded. Because I can't keep being your secret, Emma. I can't be the thing you love only when no one's watching. Emma stood abruptly, pacing. You think I wanted this? You think I planned to fall for you? Clara stood too, her voice rising. You didn't have to plan it. You just had to let it happen. And now that it has, you're terrified because it doesn't fit the picture you built for your life. Emma froze, breathing hard. Maybe I am terrified. But that doesn't mean what we have isn't real. Then prove it, Clara whispered. Emma really looked at her, and for a moment the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then she turned away. I can't. The word shattered Clara like glass. She didn't cry. She just nodded quietly and walked into her room. The door closed softly behind her, and for the first time, the apartment felt truly empty. The next few days passed in aching silence. Emma slept on the couch. Clara barely left her room except to work. The air between them was thick with unspoken things. One night, Emma found herself standing outside Clara's door, hand raised, ready to knock, but she didn't. Instead, she whispered to the quiet wood, I wish I'd met you first. The next morning, Clara was gone. Her suitcase was missing, her key left neatly on the table beside a folded piece of paper. Emma unfolded it with trembling hands. Emma, you once told me that love is supposed to make you brave. I think you were right. But bravery doesn't always mean staying. Sometimes it means walking away before the world tells you how you're supposed to live. I love you. But I can't be your secret anymore. Emma sank into the chair, tears blurring the words. She read the note over and over until the letters swam. Then she pressed it to her chest, whispering, I'm sorry. A week later, Daniel returned. The apartment was spotless, the wine glasses washed, every trace of Clara erased except for the faint smell of her vanilla shampoo that still lingered in the bathroom. Hey, Daniel said, wrapping his arms around Emma. You okay? You look tired. I'm fine, she lied. He smiled and kissed her forehead. I missed you. She smiled back, hollow inside. I missed you too. But that night, as Daniel fell asleep beside her, Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The moonlight spilled across the bed, tracing the empty space between her heart and her life. She turned on her phone, scrolling aimlessly until she stopped at a photo, Clara laughing, holding a cup of coffee, sunlight in her hair. It was taken weeks ago, during one of their quiet mornings. Emma's chest ached. She turned off the screen and whispered into the darkness, I still love you. Meanwhile, Clara had moved into a small studio apartment in Brooklyn. She painted again, something she hadn't done in years. Her friends told her she looked lighter, freer. But late at night, when the city was quiet, she would sit by the window, holding the memory of Emma like a ghost she didn't know how to let go of. She told herself she'd done the right thing. That walking away was strength. But love once lit doesn't fade easily. One evening her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Clara. The voice was breathless, familiar, the kind she'd tried so hard to forget. Emma. Too didn't know if you'd pick up. Clara's heart raced. Why are you calling me? Because I can't keep pretending, Emma said, voice cracking. I tried to go back to normal, but there's no normal without you. Emma. I left him, Emma blurted out. I told Daniel everything. I told him the truth. Clara froze. You what? I told him I fell in love with someone else. With you. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. Emma, that's huge. I know, Emma said softly. And I don't know what comes next. I just know I don't want to live a life that feels like lying. There was a long pause. The only sound was the rain tapping softly against Clara's window. Then Clara whispered, Where are you? Outside, Emma said. Your building. Clara ran to the window, and there she was, standing in the rain, no umbrella, hair plastered to her face, eyes shining like she'd found something she'd been searching for her whole life. Clara's heart leapt to her throat. Stay right there, she said, and hung up. She flew down the stairs barefoot, the rain soaking her cardigan the moment she stepped outside. Emma smiled through her tears. You're still terrible at remembering umbrellas. Clara laughed, crying and shivering at the same time. And you're still terrible at letting people go. Emma took a step forward. I'm not letting go this time. And before either could say another word, They fell into each other's arms, laughter, tears, rain, everything blurring into something that finally felt like truth. They didn't know what the future would look like. It would be complicated, messy, maybe even painful. But as they walked back upstairs, fingers intertwined, neither cared. Because for the first time they weren't running, hiding, or pretending. They were simply two women brave enough to love, and brave enough to be seen. And sometimes that's the most beautiful kind of courage there is. The morning after Emma showed up at Clara's door, the city felt different. The rain had washed the streets clean, the sky stretched wide and open, and for the first time in months, Emma woke up without the familiar ache of guilt pressing on her chest. She lay on Clara's couch, now their couch, and listened to the rhythm of the world outside. The faint sound of traffic, a barking dog, the low hum of life continuing. Beside her, Clara stirred, the blanket slipping from her shoulder. Emma turned to look at her. She looked peaceful in a way Emma had never seen before, like she finally belonged to herself. Clara opened her eyes, smiling sleepily. "Good morning." "Morning," Emma whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're real." Clara laughed softly. "Last time I checked." Emma smiled, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "I thought I'd ruined everything." "You didn't," Clara said, her tone gentle. "You just broke what needed breaking." They lay there for a long moment, their hands finding each other, fingers weaving together like they'd always been meant to. The weeks that followed were both beautiful and terrifying. Emma moved out of her old apartment permanently, signing a short lease in Brooklyn, just a few blocks from Clara's studio. They didn't rush into living together, not again, not this time. They wanted to build something steady, honest, real. But the city was watching. At work, whispers followed Emma like shadows. Some colleagues were supportive, others less so. Daniel had been dignified in his silence. He'd even told her, during their final conversation, "I hope you find what you've been missing." But the fallout was still heavy. One afternoon, Emma found herself in a boardroom filled with tight smiles and judgmental stares. Her supervisor, a man who prided himself on being modern-minded, said quietly, "You've caused quite a stir, Emma. I'd recommend keeping your personal life a little more private." Emma straightened her back. "With all due respect," she said, her voice steady, "my personal life doesn't affect the buildings I design." The room went silent. When she got home that night, Clara was painting a canvas full of warm colors, sunlight breaking through gray clouds. Emma dropped her bag and collapsed onto the couch. "You ever get tired of having to prove you deserve to be happy?" Clara turned, wiping paint from her hands. "Every day. But I'd rather be tired and free than rested and pretending." Emma smiled faintly. "God, I love you." Clara walked over, sat beside her, and kissed her forehead. "Then we're doing something right." As spring deepened into early summer, their lives began to find rhythm again. Mornings were quiet rituals, coffee, music, half-finished conversations about art and architecture. Evenings were laughter, shared dinners, and soft moments that felt like home. But not everything was easy. Love, Clara learned, doesn't erase the scars of the past. It teaches you how to live with them. Sometimes Emma woke from dreams where she was still trapped in her old life, smiling at a man she no longer loved, apologizing for feelings she couldn't control. Clara would hold her until the shaking stopped. Other times, Clara battled guilt, not for what they'd done, but for how happy she'd become afterward. "It feels unfair," she said one night. "Like we got to have our story while other people had to break for it." Emma kissed her hand. "We didn't steal this, Clara. We found it. We earned it." Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, postmarked from Connecticut, from Emma's mother. Emma sat at the kitchen table, the envelope trembling in her hand. "She knows," she said quietly. Clara set down her paintbrush. "Do you want me to stay while you read it?" Emma nodded. She unfolded the letter. "Emma, your father doesn't know I'm writing this. I saw the news about your separation. The neighbors talk, of course. They always do. I don't understand the choices you've made, but I remember the little girl who built houses out of cereal boxes because she believed everyone deserved a place where they belonged. If this woman, Clara, I think is where you belong now, then I hope you build something beautiful together. Love, Mom." Emma read the letter twice before she started crying, the quiet kind, the kind that breaks and heals you at the same time. Clara came around the table and knelt beside her, wrapping her arms around her. She doesn't hate me, Emma whispered. No, Clara said softly. She doesn't. She just needed time. Emma laughed through her tears. Guess we all did. That night they walked through the streets of Brooklyn, hand in hand, the city buzzing around them. They stopped at a small park, the kind full of kids and street musicians and the smell of roasted peanuts. I used to walk here when I felt trapped, Clara said. Back when I was married. I'd look at couples holding hands and wonder if they ever had to lie to themselves just to keep going. Emma squeezed her hand. And now I just wonder how I got lucky enough to stop lying. Emma smiled. You didn't get lucky. You got brave. They sat on a bench as the sky turned pink. A busker nearby started singing an old Fleetwood Mac song, the kind that makes your chest ache with nostalgia. Without thinking, Clara rested her head on Emma's shoulder. Emma whispered, You know, if someone told me a year ago that I'd be here with you, I would have laughed. Clara grinned. And now I can't imagine being anywhere else. Months passed. Emma's firm offered her a major project, a new community center, designed to celebrate inclusivity and connection. It felt poetic somehow that she'd get to design a space where people could simply be. Meanwhile, Clara's art started gaining attention. Her latest series, Quiet Rebellion, featured portraits of women laughing, crying, holding each other, paintings of tenderness and defiance. An art magazine reached out to feature her work, calling it a love letter to authenticity. At the gallery opening, Emma stood in front of one painting two women sitting side by side in a sunlit room, hands barely touching but hearts clearly intertwined. It's us, isn't it? She whispered. Clara smiled. It's everyone who ever had to choose between being loved and being true. Emma turned to her, her voice quiet but certain. I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of us, Clara said. Later that night, they returned home a little tipsy, a little giddy from the celebration. Emma kicked off her heels and dropped onto the couch. We're actually doing it, she said, laughing. We're living the life we used to whisper about like it was some impossible dream. Clara curled up beside her. It still feels like one sometimes. Emma looked at her, really looked, and said, If it's a dream, I don't ever want to wake up. They kissed then, slow, familiar, full of the kind of love that had weathered storms and still bloomed anyway. One Sunday morning months later, Emma woke before Clara. The sunlight spilled across the apartment, catching on canvases, coffee cups, half-read books. It looked lived in. It looked happy. She watched Clara sleeping, her face soft and peaceful. And in that quiet moment, Emma realized something she hadn't before. She didn't just love Clara. She liked her. She liked the way Clara snorted when she laughed, the way she argued with radio hosts out loud, the way she left her shoes in the hallway no matter how many times Emma tripped over them. It wasn't just romance. It was home. Clara stirred, blinking sleepily. You're staring at me again. Emma smiled. Can you blame me? Clara groaned, pulling the blanket over her head. You're ridiculous. Emma laughed. And you love it. A muffled voice from under the blanket. Unfortunately, yes. They both laughed until the morning turned to afternoon. As the seasons changed again, so did they. Their love no longer felt like rebellion. It was simply life: grocery lists, deadlines, burnt toast, quiet nights watching reruns. The extraordinary had become ordinary, and that was the most beautiful thing of all. Sometimes people stared when they walked hand in hand down the street, but most of the time no one cared. The world, Emma realized, had begun to change, or maybe they had. One evening, as they watched the sunset from their fire escape, Clara said softly, Do you ever think about what would have happened if we never lived together? If our husbands never left for that trip? Emma smiled faintly. We probably would have stayed miserable, polite, predictable, and lonely. Clara tilted her head. Do you regret any of it? Emma turned to her, eyes steady. Not a single thing. They sat in silence, the city glowing beneath them. Then Clara reached over and took Emma's hand. Let's keep building, she said. Not walls. Just us. Emma squeezed her hand. Deal. And as night settled over New York, the two women sat side by side, no longer secrets, no longer afraid. Just two souls who'd found their way home. Not by accident but by courage. Love had taken them apart. Then it had brought them back together, cleaner, stronger, real. And in that little apartment above the city, Laughter and quiet breaths filled the air, echoing softly like a promise. They had broken the rules. They had lost everything. And somehow they had found the truest thing of all. 5 years later, the world had changed. Or maybe, Clara thought as she watched the late afternoon sunlight pour through their apartment windows, they were the ones who had changed, and that made all the difference. The city was still loud, still restless, still alive in the same unpredictable rhythm. But inside their home, everything was calm. The chaos of youth, of forbidden love and restless guilt, had softened into something steady, a quiet kind of happiness that didn't need to prove itself anymore. Clara stood by the window, holding a cup of tea, her fingers warm around the porcelain. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through a stack of architectural sketches. Her hair had grown a little longer. There were faint lines around her eyes now, the kind you earn from laughing more than crying. "How's the new project going?" Clara asked, sipping her tea. Emma looked up, smiling. "You mean the one where the city wants a park that feels less corporate and more human?" "It's going." She chuckled. "Apparently, people forget that humans are kind of messy." Clara laughed. "That's what makes them beautiful." Emma leaned back in her chair, watching her. "You know, you still say things like that, and I remember exactly why I fell in love with you." Clara smiled, walking over to kiss her forehead. "And yet you're the one who designs buildings for a living. I just paint the messes." "Exactly," Emma murmured, reaching up to brush a finger along Clara's jaw. "You make the mess mean something." They had moved into this apartment 3 years ago, a sunlit loft overlooking a small park, full of plants and half-finished canvases, of blueprints and scattered coffee mugs. To outsiders, they were simply Emma and Clara, the architect and the artist, the couple who hosted open dinners for neighbors, who volunteered at youth centers, who didn't care much about fitting in because they'd already learned how to build a life outside the lines. It hadn't been easy getting here. There had been family members who turned away, friends who couldn't understand, moments of exhaustion where they wondered if love alone was enough. But time has a way of softening sharp edges. Emma's parents eventually came to visit one spring, bringing flowers and awkward smiles. Her mother had hugged Clara at the door, whispering, "You make her happy." "That's all I ever wanted." Clara's sister came next, bringing her 2 kids. They filled the apartment with laughter and crayons, and by the end of the weekend, Clara realized something she hadn't dared to before: they weren't outsiders anymore. They were simply part of life. That summer, Clara's gallery opened a new exhibit titled, "Love as It Is." It wasn't about defiance or protest anymore, it was about everyday tenderness. There were paintings of women reading side by side, of shared breakfasts, of unguarded smiles. One piece, the centerpiece of the gallery, showed 2 hands reaching across a table, one with paint stains, one holding a pencil touching gently. At the opening night, Emma stood in front of it for a long time. "That's us," she said quietly. Clara nodded. "It always has been." A journalist asked her later what inspired her to create it. Clara thought for a long time before answering. "Love isn't a grand gesture," she said. "It's the way you make coffee for someone even after a fight. It's sitting in silence and knowing you're still safe. It's being seen completely and not having to apologize for it." After the gallery closed that night, they walked home through the quiet streets, their hands intertwined. "You realize we're the most boring couple in New York now?" Emma teased. "We used to be scandalous." Clara grinned. "You say boring, I say peaceful." "Peaceful is good," Emma said. "I could live with peaceful forever." Clara leaned her head against her shoulder. "We already are." Years later, they still marked that first night, the night Emma stood in the rain outside Clara's building as their beginning. Every April they'd revisit that spot. Not to relive the pain, but to honor it. To remember how far they'd come. One April evening, as they stood in the same place, Emma looked around and smiled. "Remember how terrified we were?" "I remember you looked like a drenched cat," Clara said, laughing. "And that I thought you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen." Emma grinned. "You still think that?" Every day. They kissed there on the sidewalk, surrounded by the hum of the city, a simple, fearless kiss that no longer belonged to secrets or shame. People passed by without a second glance. And for the first time, Emma realized, no one cared, because love like theirs no longer shocked anyone. Simply was. Later that year, Emma's firm received an award for her latest project. a new LGBTQ plus community center in Manhattan. The building was filled with open light, curving lines, and quiet spaces for people to gather, talk, and heal. At the ceremony, Emma stood at the podium, hands shaking slightly as she looked out at the crowd. "When I first started designing," she said, "I believed architecture was about perfection, symmetry, balance, control. But love taught me that real beauty comes from the things that don't fit neatly together. The spaces that are imperfect, alive, human. That's what this building is. That's what this city should be." When the applause came, it was thunderous. Clara was in the front row, tears shining in her eyes. That night, back home, Emma set the award on the kitchen counter and looked at it for a long moment. "It's beautiful," Clara said softly, wrapping her arms around her from behind. Emma turned, smiling. "You're the reason it exists." Clara laughed. "I didn't draw a single line." "No," Emma said, brushing a thumb against her cheek. "But you made me brave enough to stop erasing myself." Clara pressed her forehead against hers. "And you made me believe that loving boldly doesn't mean loving loudly. Just honestly." They kissed again, slow and tender, surrounded by the quiet hum of their apartment. As autumn rolled in, the world outside began to glow amber and gold. Emma took a sabbatical that year. Clara's art studio expanded into a small community space where local women could paint, talk, and simply exist without judgment. One afternoon, Clara found Emma sitting on the balcony, watching the skyline turn to fire. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked. Emma smiled. "Just thinking about how strange it is the way life bends back toward joy when you stop fighting it." Clara sat beside her. "You think we've found joy?" Emma turned, looking at her with the softest eyes. "No," she said. "I think we built it." On a chilly December night, they hosted their annual holiday dinner, a mix of friends, neighbors, and former colleagues. The apartment was filled with laughter, the smell of cinnamon, and half-empty glasses of wine. At one point, as music drifted from the speakers, Clara and Emma found themselves slow dancing in the corner. "You realize," Clara whispered, "we've become the couple everyone looks at and says, 'I want what they have.'" Emma chuckled. "If only they knew what it took to get here." Clara leaned closer. "They don't need to. They just need to see that it's possible." Emma smiled, pulling her in tighter. "Then let's give them something worth believing in." When the guests had left and the lights dimmed, they sat together on the couch, the city glittering beyond the windows. "I used to think love was supposed to be dramatic," Clara said softly. "Big confessions, big heartbreaks. But maybe the best kind is the one that's just steady." Emma nodded. "The kind that makes the world feel quieter." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the heartbeat of the city they had once feared and now called home. "Emma." "Yeah. I'm glad our husbands went on that stupid business trip." Emma laughed so hard she nearly spilled her wine. "That's one way to thank fate." Clara smiled, her eyes warm. "Fate didn't do this. We did." Years later, long after the noise of the world had softened and their names were no longer whispered in surprise but spoken in admiration, Emma and Clara sat again on their fire escape, older now, hands still intertwined. The city below moved on, as cities always do. But up there, time seemed to stand still. Emma looked at Clara, her voice gentle. "If you could go back, would you change anything?" Clara thought for a long time before answering. "Maybe I'd tell my younger self that love doesn't always look the way we expect. That sometimes it shows up disguised as chaos, but it's really salvation." Emma smiled. "And what would you tell her about me?" Clara turned to her, eyes shining. "That you were worth every storm." Emma laughed softly, her thumb brushing against Clara's hand. "And you were the calm after every one." They sat like that until the sky turned deep blue, the stars blinking awake above the city. And for once there were no doubts, no what-ifs, no shadows left behind, only the simple truth that had guided them all along. Love doesn't need permission. It only needs courage. In a world that had once told them who they should be, Emma and Clara had chosen, again and again, to be themselves. And in that choice they had found not just love but freedom. The kind of freedom that outlives fear, outlasts time, and leaves behind a legacy of quiet, unwavering light. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to get notifications about next videos.